Good afternoon. Welcome to our session today with Kai Cheng Tom. My name is Alan Wong, and I am your, I was going to say, I'm your leader. I am your host for this session of the English Symposium for 2021. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that the place in which we work and study is situated within the traditional unceded lands of the Ganegaga or Mohawk peoples, part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. There is also a strong historic presence of Anishinaabe peoples in what is now known as the Greater Montreal Area. Jojake or Montreal has long been and continues to be a gathering place for many First Peoples from all directions. We honor and thank the traditional custodians of this land and strive to work for the success of future generations. On behalf of the Vanier College English Department, I would like to welcome you to Whose Freedom? Art, Text, and Expression in the Public Domain, our 10th annual symposium. During this 3-day event, we are presenting a wide variety of speakers, performers, activists, and writers, exploring the impact of language and voice. We'll be asking tough questions such as whose voice deserves to be listened to and amplified? What are the consequences of pushing aside those stories we don't want to hear? And how can language be a tool to empower or to imprison? This event would not be possible without the support of numerous collaborators. Thus, the Symposium Organizing Committee would like to thank the Faculty of General Education, the Faculty of Arts, Business, and Social Science, Vanier's Director General and Academic Dean, Vanier's Communications Office, the Vanier College English Department, the SCI Office, Vanier's Indigenous Studies Program, Student Services, VTV, our many speakers and performers, and of course, you, our wonderful audience. Before I introduce Kai Cheng Tom, I kindly ask that you refrain from recording this session out of respect for our guests. When possible, we will provide recordings of these sessions. Well, this one is being recorded and it will be available early next week, probably, to the Vanier College community. Finally, there will be time for Q&A after the talk if you're interested in learning more from our guest. I think Kai Cheng is probably going to accept questions as we go along as well. So there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screens that you can type your questions into. Try to refrain from typing too many questions into the chat. But if you want to as well, Kai Cheng can see those as they happen. All right, so now I'm going to just read the introduction to this session, which is called On Cancel Culture, a discussion with Kai Cheng Tom. Few terms have felt more loaded or ubiquitous in recent years than quote unquote cancel culture, becoming so woven into our social fabric that it appears a day cannot go by without some controversy emerging in the media to fan the flames of the so-called quote unquote culture wars. Certainly, the label has been weaponized by many people, from politicians to journalists to celebrities and quote unquote influencers to even members of the general public, through accusations aimed at those openly called out when what they view as abusive and oppressive language and behavior, that they are stifling freedom of expression. Meanwhile, the pursuit of accountability, while a worthy endeavor, can often result in an overzealousness that entangles individuals whose indiscretions are born more out of ignorance than malice. Someone who has tried to grapple with this form of social conflict by exploring and examining its gray areas of gray is writer, performer, and cultural/community worker Kai Cheng Tom, as well as author, performer as well on occasion, who will present her nuanced and transformative perspective on a conundrum that has seen people who say and do problematic things become problematize themselves, whether they deserve it or not. So I'd like to welcome Kai Cheng Tom to our venue. So take it away.
Thank you. I don't think I wrote that description, did I? Because I just want to say
it was me.
Oh, thank you. It was so lovely, and I also I wouldn't describe myself as nuanced, but thoughtful, but I want to be that way. So I just want to get the praise without being embarrassed about writing the praise for myself. So now that I know you wrote it, I can just accept it. Thank you. Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Kai Cheng, and I use she and her pronouns. I'm talking to you today from Toronto, also called Toronto, Treaty 13 territory, dished with one spoon wampum treaty territory, originally stewarded by the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, and of the Anishinaabe particularly, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and now home to many Indigenous peoples as well as white settlers and settlers of color. I know that probably most, if not all of you, are in Montreal, also known as Tiohtià:ke. And yeah, I am here to have a conversation with you about cancel culture, also sometimes called call out culture, which I know is kind of like a hot topic today. So what brings me to this topic, or like, I don't know, when I was asking myself what I would say, I was like, why would Alan invite me to this? So I work these days as a mediator and conflict resolution professional. I have a background in couple and family therapy and clinical social work. And then I moved out of those professions, working mostly with individuals and families, to working with organizations and community groups, sometimes like schools, like colleges and universities too, when people have conflicts with one another. So some of you might have had conflicts with your professors before. Some of you might have had conflict with your friends before. You've probably had conflict with your families before. And this is the kind of work that a mediator does, is going into those situations and trying to support people to come to resolution. And the reason that I come into this work is because I like to say that I am an expert. I'm like half an expert at conflict. I'm an expert at getting into conflicts, and then not really at all an expert at getting out of them. I'm kind of bad at that in my own life. And so that's what kind of led me to study conflict resolution and kind of get into the practice of it, is trying to get better at this thing in my own life, and hopefully bring something useful to the world as well. And I noticed that in my own communities, a lot of which are like artistic communities, I have had a few books published and done various kinds of like media arts. I was a Sephora model for like 1 second. And you're like, this girl, a Sephora model? Really? Yes, everybody can be a Sephora model. Well, I don't know about everybody, but I became a Sephora model against all the odds. And that's a joke. You can laugh. Hopefully you're laughing on the other side. In artistic communities where people are very public and have public profiles, it's also fairly common now that people get publicly called out. And it's kind of common that even people who don't have big public profiles get called out, by which I mean somebody who is in a conflict with them goes on social media and shares a video or like a screenshot, or just writes a story that paints that person in a bad light and says, look, everyone, look how terrible this person is. Let's, not support their business, or not be friends with them, or, stay away from them because they're dangerous, and all of this kind of thing. And I'm just going to invite you to take a moment to take a deep breath with me and type into the chat if you have ever seen a call out or a cancellation happening on social media, whether that's a call out of someone that you know, or someone who is like a celebrity, or someone just because they're kind of famous. Okay. Someone's like, of course, Twitter be crazy, multiple times, especially on Twitter. Yes, on Twitter. Twitter's coming up a lot. Yes, 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 yes. Dave Chappelle, James Charles. Don't know who that is, but I believe you. Is it like the person who directed Guardians of the Galaxy, or is that James Gunn? Anyway, Twitter is nuts. Yes, yes, many times. Yes, JK Rowling, Shane Dawson. Yep. Beauty Goris, don't know who that is, but I believe you. Yes. Okay, so a lot of you have seen this call out happening. And I would just like to invite you, if you are feeling comfortable, and you don't have to do this if you're not feeling comfortable. Oh, I see people get canceled on TikTok as well. Yes, they do. On all the social medias, people can get canceled, but some have more cancellations than others. So if you're feeling comfortable, I would just invite you to take a moment to take another deep breath and type into the chat, what are your feelings when you see someone being canceled on social media? What emotions come up for you? Over it, sad, it depends, cringe. Well, sometimes it's deserved, sad, depends on the situation, depends when it's petty drama, it's quite annoying. It depends on what they're canceled for, right? Yeah, it really could. depend. So like a range of things. A lot of it depends. Mixed feelings. Sometimes it's for good reasons. Sometimes it's just stupid. But when deserved, I'm happy to see it. If the reason is misinterpreted, I'm annoyed that some people don't think. I don't know. I just keep scrolling. Yeah. So like a big range of possibilities. Now, my last question for you before I stop making you do stuff and start talking is, if you're open to it, type into the chat. If you did something that was wrong, like genuinely you did something that was wrong, maybe it could be small or could be big, how would you feel about that going on the internet, about someone doing a call out? If you did something wrong, how would you feel if someone calls you out for it on the internet? I see embarrassed, I don't care, overwhelmed, I deserve it, YouTube apology video. I mean, I have to deal with the consequences. If deserved, I'll take it as a lesson. Don't think I'm the only one who did it. I'm just the only one who got exposed. Take it as a lesson. Ashamed, hopefully learn from it. This is beautiful. I feel like I don't care. Quotes, cries on Instagram. You guys are good at this. So they should try to address me first, but if I deserve it, I guess I should just take it. So we've got a lot of different opinions on this one, but a lot of you are saying that you try to learn from it, which is amazing. I think that's like really awesome, and like not what I hear from every group. Folks being where folks are sometimes like, well, that's not something I should do, or that's not something people should do, or it's not something that people should like take into the public. So now I have a question for you, and you don't have to type how you feel into the chat, but you could if you wanted to. What if you had a conflict with someone and you weren't sure that you'd done something wrong, but they called you out anyway? Like, what would that be like, and how would you feel about it? Would that be different from if it was something that you knew for sure you had done wrong? Oh, and I already see someone's there in the chat saying, well, that's wrong. Yeah, so maybe you have different feelings about this. Would prefer if they acted like an adult and talked to me. I'm like, go off, sis. Okay. Talk about them privately and find out first for anything. Okay, so you do have opinions about this and you want to share them. That is great. So I will say I am a mediator, which means I see conflicts every day for work. And of all those conflicts, how many of them do you think there was a person that was like, yeah, I clearly am wrong about this, and so I'm gonna take my lesson? How many of those conflicts? Someone is like 0, 10%, few. Yeah, I don't really know the percentage because I don't do statistics on like cases like that. But I think it was like out of this year, out of a few dozen, like 2. Like 2 where people were like, oh, I did a bad, I want to come back into relationship with you. And so this is the tricky thing about conflict and about cancel culture. It is that I think a lot of people who would be willing to be canceled and experience that as a lesson if they knew in their values that they had done something wrong. Most people are like, I would want to fix that or learn from it if I did something wrong. But in most conflicts, people think that the other person is wrong and that we are right. And so that's not really how most of the conflicts go, particularly when it comes to like public conversation, because it's a lot easier to do deep self-reflection and admit or that we might be wrong when the conversation is happening away from like the judgmental public eye of anonymous strangers that you don't know. So let's talk about conflict a little bit. Where is my PowerPoint? I promise I'm not going to do too many PowerPoint slides, that is. Just a few. Okay. From current slide. So how many of you have ever seen this diagram or some version of this diagram before? It's called the window of tolerance. Nope, no one, never. Nobody. That's okay. This is a model that is often shown in therapy or mindfulness classes. And it basically is this idea that inside everybody, there is like a specific amount of stress that you can feel while still being what is called, in psychological terms, socially engaged. So social engagement, being socially engaged, just means that you are able to relate to another person in front of you or the group of people around you with curiosity and like trying to stay in relationship with them. So considering their feelings, wondering what they're thinking, wanting them to, be good at a baseline level or like to be safe. That's social engagement. It's like the level where you're able to have a reasonably calm conversation with someone, which doesn't mean you don't feel any emotions. That's when you're socially engaged, you can feel all the emotions, but you're not overwhelmed. You're not thinking I'm in like deep life danger from this other person or people. So that's the window of tolerance when we are experiencing stress, but still socially engaged with other people. And some of us are better at this than others. It kind of depends on just what your personality is like or what you've experienced in the past. Or like what you believe is going on in the situation. Like if you think that you're in serious danger, you're probably not going to stay in your window of tolerance. Outside of the window of tolerance, when we have a level of stress that is that pushes us beyond our window, we get these things that are often called survival responses or survival instincts that are activated in our bodies and our brains. And these are also sometimes called trauma responses. They're meant to save our lives. Some of you might have heard the term fight or flight before. Anybody? I would ask you to raise your hands, but I can't see you, so I don't know. Fight or flight, yes. So fight or flight is an example of a survival response, and it happens automatically in the body when we're exposed to a certain amount of stress, like, oh, I don't know, you're in a conflict with somebody, and they just said you did something bad, right? When someone I don't know, cuts in front of you in a line where you've been waiting for a really long time. That might be stress that gets you out of your window of tolerance. Or when you see a bear and a bear is chasing you, wants to eat you. Both of these things might get you out of your window of tolerance, depending on how you're experiencing it in the moment. So if we go into fight or flight, what tends to happen in the body is that we get nervous system activation. Our hearts beat faster, we get hot, sweaty, our breathing becomes quick. And the emotional tone of that experience is usually panic or rage, like really high anxiety, really high anger, or both. And we might start to scream or swear or cry. We might like get the F out of there, or we might start punching somebody out. This is hyperarousal or fight or flight. There is also a survival response called freeze, which some of you may have heard of, but it is less commonly talked about in the mainstream. And this is when, in response to a high level of stress, the body shuts down the nervous system or goes parasympathetic rather than sympathetic. So if you've ever seen, say, like a deer in headlights, or you've probably heard that expression, when an animal is stressed out and they freeze and stop moving, that's an example of the freeze response. Or if you see dogs sometimes who are fighting, one dog will drop to the ground and roll over and play dead. That's an example of a different kind of freeze response, one that's a little bit more relaxed than the high intensity freeze. And in freeze, as a survival state or hypoarousal, we tend to have a lower heart rate and more shallow breathing. And we tend to feel an emotional tone of numbness or detachment or boredom, like, oh, I'm so over this, or I don't care, or like whatever you say, you're always right, I'm always wrong, okay, right? And in conflicts, people almost always get triggered at least to the edge of their window of tolerance or outside of their windows of tolerance. But the direction they go really depends on what they've experienced in the past, what their individual body and genetics are like. It's just sort of kind of individual. But you might have noticed that, in your life, when you're in conflict with someone, they get maybe like really upset, and you tend to get detached or numb, or maybe the opposite. And what happens when you have people in conflict who are detached from each other, or one is detached and the other is like really upset? This person up here usually wants to get resolution right now. Let's talk it out. Let's talk it out. And this other person is usually like, I need space. And the more this person is like, we have to fix it right now, the more this person down here is like, I really need space. Stop forcing me to do stuff. And then this person is up here being like, you don't even care about me at all. And this is how we get kind of relationship breaks. Or we have two people up here who are like both really upset, and they're like, how dare you? And then we get a relationship break because both are kind of doing aggression or kind of being intense with each other. Or we have two people who are down here and shut down, and they're like, they're not even talking to each other because they're both disengaged. And I don't want to knock our survival responses and say that they're bad, because actually they're really good. In lots of conflicts with other people, we might actually need to like punch someone out, right? Or we might need to just pretend everything is okay and play dead so that the danger will pass. The time when we really want to have our window available is when we are trying to have an ongoing relationship with someone. Like it's someone that we care about and we want them to change, or we want to change ourselves. This is when we want to be in that window. And I sometimes call it the window of transformation instead of the window of tolerance, because when we're talking about conflict, we're usually asking people to change in some way. I might be asking, let's say I'm in a conflict with, I don't know, my mother. I really want her to be different and, I don't know, see things from my perspective. And she wants me to be really different and, respect her as my elder and my mom and all that kind of stuff. And when we're in our window of transformation, when we are socially engaged with each other, we're able to respect one another's boundaries and have a conversation. I can ask her questions, she can ask me questions, and then maybe we come to an agreement. Or maybe we don't come to an agreement, but then we can still agree to disagree, and it's not the end of the world. But when we're out of our window, then maybe we do a few different things. One is maybe like, I'm like, well, F you, mom, and I'm like, walk out of the room, right? Like that would be a flight response. Or I might start, yelling at my mom and be like, don't you know how terrible you are? Or she might be yelling that at me. That would be like a fight response. Or I might do this weird thing where I'm like, oh, mom, I'm so sorry. You're right. I just never want to make you feel bad. You're always correct. And I'm just so sorry, but I don't really feel sorry in my heart. And that would be an example of maybe like a kind of freeze, or sometimes like called a fawn response. We're just trying to please the other person so that we can get out of trouble. I don't know if you've ever seen that or experienced it, but it's kind of what happens when people do those, like, I think someone mentioned like YouTube apology videos or whatever, and they're crying and sad, but maybe you're in your heart, you can tell that they're not really sorry, right? They're not really engaged. They're just trying to get out of trouble. Maybe they're genuinely upset that they're in trouble, but they're not actually connecting to like change. This could be an example of someone outside of their window. And this is why a lot of apologies that the person making the apology feels is genuine doesn't feel genuine to the person who's receiving the apology, because the apology giver actually does feel very sad and overwhelmed and is trying to get out of trouble. Please stop making me feel guilty. But this person over here is like, it's not about you not feeling guilty. It's about you understanding what you did wrong. And this is a very hard place to get to because it requires often like a prolonged stay in the uncomfortable zone. And then sometimes if we're like really collapsed into a freeze response, you might actually just cry and say, oh, the other person's bullying me. It's bullying that this person said I was racist, even though I was racist, right? And that would be also not desirable. So what we are wanting when we are trying to get into the place of change in conflict is that window of transformation, the place where people feel safe enough to ask questions and be heard, and also safe enough to receive feedback and then think about it for a while. I'm going to stop the share. Oh, wait, not quite. Okay, so unfortunately, it's pretty hard to stay in a window of transformation during conflict, as some of you might have noticed. And when we live in a community where we are frequently traumatized, which I would say that most people have some form of trauma, particularly around conflict, it's hard to find that window of transformation, hard to stay in it, especially when you're in a group that's already out there. So when you're on Twitter, for example, or on TikTok, we often see like the opposite, where people will be responding from their fight or flight or their freeze response to conflict. And that is where we see that the response to conflict is like binary thinking, like it's us or them, it's good or evil. The fact that this person made a tweet 12 years ago that was problematic means that they're bad forever and will never be safe until they're gone from the internet or gone from the world. And that is how and that's how we kind of get some versions of like kind of like really intense call outs all the time, even for like small things. Sometimes there's also a double standard. Like when we're good, it's because we're good people. And when we're bad, it's because we're having a bad day. But when they're bad, it's because they're bad. When they're bad, it's because they're bad people. And when they're good, it's a trick or somebody made them do it. So we're kind of doing this like cognitive thing where we're preventing ourselves from coming to a deeper understanding of the other person. A culture of surveillance, which is where we have to watch what we say and do, because one wrong move and we're out, which means that we're less likely to tell people when we think that maybe they're calling someone out or they're having a conflict over the wrong reasons. And some other traits too, but the one I'm going to point out is toxic triangulation, which is this idea that when we have a conflict with another person, we've got to get our friends in there and they've got to take a side. And if they don't take a side, it means that they're bad. If we are the person who's being called to take a side and we don't do it, then we're going to like lose our membership to like the club of good people. So these are some ways that what happens inside of our bodies can influence the direction of conflict and cancel culture. I think because these responses that we have, we've kind of had them forever as humans, or so the theory goes, but it's been a while since we all kind of lived in a small environment and our responses impacted so many other people. And on the internet, what we get is like sort of like a huge version of like a small village or a small community where everybody's opinions and feelings are getting shared at the same time, and it's very difficult to find that place of the window of tolerance or the window of transformation to have a more nuanced discussion. So how do we get people into their window of transformation? Usually through compassion and curiosity. There's many different kinds of conflict de-escalation theories in classes. You can take them yourselves, but usually they have some version of this, like getting curious and compassionate toward the person that we are in conflict with. Wanting to hear more about why the person is coming from where they're coming from, and respecting them unconditionally, even if we don't condone their actions or beliefs, which is pretty tricky when someone is saying stuff that is like really offensive or doing stuff that is genuinely harmful, right? And one way to stay in our compassionate place is to remember that we need to have compassion for ourselves as well, because when we have compassion for ourselves, we can have boundaries. So being compassionate and curious to someone so we can de-escalate conflict doesn't mean that we always have to accept terrible or abusive behavior. It just means that if we are open to it, we could consider where that behavior is coming from, while also saying you're not allowed to hurt me at the same time. Okay, I'm going to stop there. So how does this all relate to like cancel culture as a whole? Well, I think a big piece of it is that it's very easy for us, especially when we're on the internet and removed from someone's physicality, but also when someone is like famous or like has a lot of power, to get disconnected from compassion and curiosity. And because a lot of us have not experienced compassion and curiosity towards ourselves, it's very difficult to give it to others, right? Like I'm a trans person and I'm a person of color, and it's like not actually like that easy or desirable always for me to be like, I'm going to be compassionate and curious to like white people who are saying racist stuff, or like to JK Rowling who is saying really transphobic stuff. It's not easy for me to have curiosity or compassion for that. And it's not even really that fair to ask me to have compassion or curiosity for it. But if I do have that available to me, then maybe that allows me to have a different conversation with the transphobic or racist people in my life. And if I want to have a different relationship with them, I have to start having those difficult conversations, which is not something we have to do all the time. one of the really important and powerful things about cancel culture is that it's kind of a democratization of power. It means that you can't just do a bad thing and then get away with it if you're a rich person or like a powerful person. It means that often you're going to be caught on video or screen capped or something, and everybody's going to see it. And that can be really important. It can be important for justice. For example, something I often think about is this example of housing rights. I don't know how many of you are like living and paying rent, but probably a lot of you right now. And maybe some of you have had bad landlords. Anybody have like a really bad landlord before? Someone who's just like really taking advantage of you. And one of the major tactics in the housing rights movement was to put the names of bad landlords in public, so that they would have to change their behavior. That embarrassment or that shame or just the public pressure would force them to change their behavior. Not allowing you to get a cat. Well, I don't know if that's the reason to call your landlord out on the internet, but you have to make decisions on your own. I'm not going to tell you what to do or not do. So when we have human rights violations, or someone is doing something that is actively harming someone in the moment, the call out or the cancellation can be very important to get them to stop. But getting someone to stop a bad behavior and getting them to actually change who they are is a really different thing. And I don't know about you, but it is pretty hard for me to reflect on my behavior if I don't really know why what I've done is wrong, or that I've done something wrong, and someone is like, someone is screaming at me, or if like 10,000 strangers on the internet are screaming at me. It's pretty hard for me to do like, oh, I'm going to self-reflect. Instead, I'm going to feel bullied, right? So my invitation to you is to think about when you are in conflicts with people, or there is someone who's important to you that you would like to change, how can you get into that place of being compassionate and curious, first about what's happening inside of you so that you can be resourced, and second, how can you be compassionate and curious toward them? And what would it take to have a conversation where they are starting to shift where they are coming from? I wanted to read a little piece and then I'll open for questions. So I've been writing a book recently called 30 Love Letters or 30 Love Litanies. I haven't decided yet. And I wrote a letter to JK Rowling because, she's such a subject of public debate and cancel culture right now. And some people are like, JK Rowling is transphobic, we should get rid of her. And other people are like, JK Rowling is brave. And, she's just saying what everybody's thinking. So I wrote a love letter to JK Rowling, which I don't think she will ever read, but that's okay. And it goes like this. It starts with a quote from JK Rowling. So she wrote, "If you could come inside my head and understand what I feel when I read about a trans woman dying at the hands of a violent man, you'd find solidarity and kinship. I have a visceral sense of the terror in which those trans women will have spent their last seconds on Earth." And then there's another quote from JK Rowling where she says, "When you throw open the doors of bathrooms and changing rooms to any man who feels or believes he's a woman, then you open the door to any and all men who wish to come inside." That's JK Rowling's words. Here are mine. "I wish you wouldn't fear me. If you could come inside my head and understand what I feel when I read the words of a cisgender woman who's terrified that the coming of my liberation means the ending of hers, then you'd find your mirror image trying to break out of the frame. It does not do to dwell on nightmares and forget to live and let live, dear Joanne. I don't want to exist in a world where I am afraid of you, where you are afraid of me, where I am afraid what men will do when you are afraid of me. Believe it or not, I know something about being a woman. I know what it's like to live in a body defined by what men can take from it. I live in terror too, like you. I know what being a survivor is. I know what being a survivor does. I know about the things we become in the dark. What fear turns us into when we are desperate to live. Voldemort means flight from death, doesn't it, Joanne? I wasn't much of a Potter fan, but if I understand correctly, your wicked wizard broke his soul into 7 separate pieces and drank the blood of the innocent, started wars and drank snake's milk, all in the name of escaping death. Fear makes monsters of us all. You wrote so many monsters, so many magical creatures, and yet I don't think you know really what a monster is, Joanne. A monster is a part of ourselves that we don't want to find in the mirror. A part of ourselves we try to cut out and split off and put inside other people so they can carry it for us. our fear, our shame. These are dark arts of the oldest kind. Dear Joanne, what spells are stronger than the dark arts? What magic did it take to end hatred, stop a war, break an unforgivable curse? Not an easy riddle, but I bet between the two of us we could figure it out. You and me, survivors both. You and me, students of enchantment. You and me, and the army of girls and women between us, all of us, monsters and witches, the ones who lived. Okay, so that is my presentation. Thank you for listening. Open to questions or to comments. Anything you would like to ask or to say, share about conflict and cancel culture. And Alan, are you going to moderate us?
Yeah, so there is a Q&A button, as I mentioned, at the bottom. If anyone has any questions, please, you can leave the compliment certainly in the chat. That's fine. Okay, so we are getting some, okay, we're getting comments. So there's a thank you for your presentation. Does anybody have anything they would like to ask Kai Cheng? Okay, so is canceling someone over something they did when they were teens, for instance, acceptable? So I guess the whole like going back to some like 10 years ago, their their tweets or that kind of thing. So I guess maybe someone like who's what's her name? I can't remember her name now. For some, Asian, married to John Legend. Why can't I remember?
I'm
Oh,
so
okay.
sorry.
I can't remember that. Anyway, or Trudeau, like when he was, I guess, younger, having brown face. So is canceling someone something over what something they did or said in the past acceptable? I guess we'll start with that question.
Yeah, great question. I think Trudeau was an adult when he did the blackface and brownface, at least partially. So that's a bit of a different category for me, even though he was younger. Especially because he was like a teacher at the time. But the question about teens or childhood is really a good one, I think. And I'm not like the expert. I'm not like the authority or the law. I can't tell you like for sure. But I believe as an adult who spent a lot of time working with children and teens, like when I was a social worker, I did a lot of work with children and teens. I just really believe that childhood and adolescence is a time where people should be like protected and like yes be like told and given feedback and prevented from doing harm. But I think that like being exposed to the public and like to a lot of strangers' opinions, if that's what we mean by cancellation, is like pretty inappropriate as like a punishment or like an accountability measure for a child, including teenagers. Like I just have a really strong belief that that developmental period should be like one where we hold folks to the standard of like they are in a different developmental stage. So, in my book, no, I don't think it's ever appropriate to like drag a minor in public. I think that's something like I think that discipline or accountability or consequences should happen outside of the public sphere for younger people. But that's just me, and you can think about it, on your own as well. Yeah, thank you for that question.
What about adults? So what about adults who like maybe 10 or 15 years ago said something that was not the greatest, and they get called out on it like 10 or 15 years later?
Oh, I mean, again, I'm not the law or the authority on this, and like people are gonna do what they're gonna do, but I really believe that like um, childhood is a time when we are growing and changing and tender and vulnerable, and like we don't know the reasons or the context that someone has done something really unacceptable. Like I know a lot of teenagers, I'm just going to be real, I know a lot of teenagers who had like racist and fascist views when they were teens, and I don't blame teenagers for that. They're influenced by the adults around them and the context they grow up in. So when those people become adults, if they are different when they are adults, right, like if they have changed, I don't personally see the utility of of canceling someone over what they did as a teen, because if they're already different, if they have already changed, then really the only reason we're doing it is like to make them feel more pain. And I don't believe that making someone feel pain just for that sake is good enough reason. I don't know if I'm really believing in punishment at all, but if we're going to do punishment, we should at least kind of think there might be a positive outcome to it, right? So that's just my belief.
I think someone is a little I guess wants maybe some clarification. How does conflict how we deal with this is from the chat, how we deal with conflict links with cancel culture. That's that's a lot pretty much your whole presentation, but they seem to be a little unclear on that connection.
I mean, I'm happy to explain. Maybe, I probably could have explained it more clearly. So cancel culture is an outgrowth of conflict. Conflict is when we are like, someone has violated the expectations of society, or at least myself, and then I'm going to do something about it, right? That's conflict. And when we have conflict, often now, conflict ends up on the internet in the form of a cancellation or a call out. And this is especially true of conflicts between people or around people who are famous or have a public platform, but not all the time, right? Like, so we've seen examples where people have conflicts in public parks or in private apartments, and then they get posted to the internet, right? Like videos of that get posted to the internet, and then the way that that conflict is responded to is like the person who does the cancellation is getting all these other people in the public to punish them by like through humiliation or getting them fired or something like that. So that's like the link. And then I guess the question that I'm asking is, and some of you are asking, right, is like, is there another way that we can respond to conflict that doesn't involve cancellation? Because generally people are afraid of being canceled. And is cancellation actually an appropriate way to respond to conflict? And what I'm kind of saying in my presentation is yes, in some cases, and no in others. And we want to be thoughtful. And generally, the time when it is not that appropriate or helpful as a response to conflict, like when cancel culture is not a helpful response to conflict, is when we are wanting people to make genuine changes or stay in like an authentic relationship with us.
Okay, we have a question. How do we find the balance between accountability, accountability and using cancel culture as a form of censorship against people you simply disagree with, which could lead to fascistic behavior?
That's such a good question. And I mean, I don't think this one is easily answered. I think part of the reason that I do the presentations and the work that I do is I'm trying to help people find the balance in themselves where they can use a different response to conflict than like cancellation or punishment or putting people in prison. This is like the big part of the work that I do as like a mediator and an activist. So the reason that people go to cancel culture, well, there are many reasons, but one of the big reasons is that people don't feel like they are safe or empowered to deal with conflicts in private or interpersonally. And so what they do is they turn to the internet, which is a big source of power because you have all these other people who then get involved, often without any context. And so what we really want to do is find some way in this like new era of the internet and like social justice politics, and like all these new things that are also like often pretty good, right? Generally, we like the internet and social justice politics, well, some of us do, is to find a way to empower people to notice like when is a conflict like actually really serious and like there needs to be public accountability, and when could I deal with this by myself or like with like in private with like a small group of people. And I think a big part of it is that people don't have conflict skills, they don't have conflict training. Like we're not taught, most of us are not taught in school or in our workplaces about like what are the options for us if we have conflicts. So yeah, I think a big piece of it is like creating that social infrastructure and the social skill sets as like a norm where people are not feeling like, oh, the only way to feel heard or to have power is to call someone out on the internet. Oh, you're muted, Alan.
Yeah, I'm muted. Didn't think I'm mindful of that, but then suddenly. Okay, so do you think cancel culture will get better? I guess meaning that will it I guess, ease out, or worse as years go by, and with the way that social media is?
I have no idea. I think on the one hand, I think that like folks who are younger than millennials, like Gen Z and younger, like might be over cancel culture. I feel like the millennial generation, which is the one I'm in, is like largely responsible for this. I'm very sorry about it. um, um, but I also see in like the work with the like younger people that I do, like I think the way people use the internet is just going to change because of the threats of cancel culture. Like, in the like earlier days of the internet, everyone was anonymous. And then Facebook came around, and then suddenly there was this giant change where everybody was like public, and faces and names were attached. And I think that a lot more people, especially younger folks, are going to get really reconcerned with privacy. Already, I see this happening. And like find ways to do social media and like internet interactions where they're like kind of protected. So that's kind of what I actually imagine is going to happen, is the way we use the internet is going to change.
Okay, next question. Is canceling someone just a matter of personal feelings instead of the more logical sense, and prevents people from thinking? So I guess, is it feeling over logic?
I think it really depends on the situation. Um, in terms of who is doing the call out, right? Like, so if I'm calling someone out or canceling someone, like if I start it, it kind of depends on what's happened to me, right? Like maybe there's something really terrible that happened to me, like someone did something really, really violent to me and I need to make it public. Or maybe this is part of like a bigger labor rights movement and I need to like point out how all the bosses in my industry are doing bad labor practices. That seems pretty logical to me, that you would go and get the power of the community to overturn, the oppression of the bosses or the racists or whatever. But what's interesting about cancellation is that I think is the people who are responding, like people who are not involved in like the actual conflict, who then are the ones who do like the piling on. And like I know in a lot of instances, especially in like fan culture, there's this like weird thing where like a content creator will get canceled for something that's relatively minor. And then people will send them like all these horrible messages, like emails and death threats and like ugly drawings of them and stuff. You know about all this because you're younger. So, to me, that's never appropriate. Like, it's never appropriate to harass someone. It just isn't. And like, I'm like, but what's really interesting is like, why are those people doing that? Like, it's like some celebrity you don't actually know, or content creator you don't actually know, who didn't actually do anything to you. Like, why are you sending these death threats? And that has something to do with those people's personal feelings. I think that, they could work out in different ways. Oh, you're muted again, Alan.
We have two different questions for two different people that are kind of related. So one is, do you think the author's work should be separated from the author when they get canceled? And the other one, sort of as almost an example, I love JK Rowling and her writing. Her books are a huge part of my life, but I truly hate her. Should I feel guilty to continue reading her books?
Oh, I mean, this is not an easy question, but I think I want to say like the like literature and the media that's important to us, when we're younger and over our lives, it's not easy to change that. Like we already had the positive experience, and whatever you took away from those books, like the Harry Potter books or whatever else it is that she wrote that was important to you, those things remain important, even if JK Rowling has done some, not so good things. Um, so I don't know. I would love to take guilt out of the equation, particularly if you've already read the books, right? It's a bit of a separate question. Like, should I spend money to support this author if they've done something, if they're like saying things that are really terrible or they're promoting things that are really terrible? And, probably lots of you have different opinions on JK Rowling. So I'm not going to tell you like, JK Rowling's the devil. I'm not going to do that. But I will say, this broader question about should the author's work be separated from the author when they get canceled? I think it really depends. Like, first of all, we should look at like, is the work saying something that's harmful? That's like an easy question, or relatively easy question to answer. And then second, like, is like, what are we talking about when we talk about canceling an author? Like, are we just talking about not buying their books, right? Like, are we talking about like getting rid of all their works from like the public sphere? These are not easy questions to answer. But I think it really is in some ways like a case by case basis.
Okay. when did cancel culture become such a big part of society? Because if it is part of social media, then it must stem from situations or occurrences where similar things happened before social media. So was it always referred as such? So this is a question about our age,
Yeah, I know.
basically.
Well, I would say that this is a very interesting question because you could say that cancel culture started with the rise of the first generation internet, right? And particularly when um, like the use of social media and like personally identifying social media became widespread. And you could see versions of cancel culture happening on like LiveJournal and MySpace. If you know what those things are, they're like like earlier like big social media sites before Facebook, before kind of these things became more mainstream. But I think like the tendency to like go and publicly shame someone for like a transgression or something we believe they've done wrong is pretty old in human history. And for sure, we can see examples of it in like colonial culture from from the 16th century. We can see it further back than that, right? Like any practice where people were forced to publicly like comment on their quote unquote sins, right? Some of you may have read the Scarlet Letter as a part of your like English studies, or just for fun, you might have read the Scarlet Letter. This would be an example of like what cancel culture was before we had the internet, right? Right, or social media or anything like that. There was always kind of like this tendency to like publicly denounce and shame people for perceived transgression, whether they really did the transgression or not, or whether the transgression was actually bad or not. There's something I think inside human beings and the way we're connected socially that's like when someone does something wrong, we want everyone to know, right? And then we want to get people on our side. And I think that's pretty old.
Yeah, I mean, I would even add that, with I guess the democratization of media, the accessibility to media, that probably has made, there's probably been an increase because people have more access to say something, that there probably has been more of an increase over time. I mean, we can think back to just like even before the internet, before the internet, was there such a time? The 70s, 80s, 90s, boycotts were very common, sort of on a wider level where people would go to the media and sort of, say they're going to boycott a particular event or a particular even country, let's say, because of transgressions of those particular people or nations. But I think, just to add my 2 cents in, I think
Totally,
with the
totally, yeah.
advent of all these sort of different media outlets, and also I think capitalism has a huge role to play in it too, because people are making money off of this. Obviously we've had people talk about Facebook recently and how they kind of you know haven't really have maybe encouraged, by not saying anything or not doing anything, this kind of culture, Twitter too. So I think maybe that has something to do with it as well. Just people wanting to make money and encouraging more of this so that more people participate and go on their different platforms or whatever. So I don't know if you want to respond
No,
to
I
that.
thought that was beautiful. I thought that was such a great addition.
My little
Yeah,
rant.
it's good.
Also, it's not about me. So another question: wouldn't having a completely anonymous internet make really horrible people get away with saying really horrible things and feel validated, since they surround themselves with more of their kind? It reminds me of the mosque shooting from a few years back.
Yeah, I think it probably would like make a lot of things more bad. Um, I think we already have that. Like we do already have anonymous internet forums where people then like kind of create like really intense, toxic paradigms, which then can lead to violence. So we already have that. And I mean, I think I'm not saying that if people shift toward becoming more anonymous on the internet to protect themselves from cancellation, I don't think that's necessarily like a net good. I'm just curious about like maybe that is the way that things are going. But I mean, in the opposite direction, you know, we see phenomena happening like in China, for example, where the internet's becoming increasingly like de-anonymized, and people's like behavior is tracked. And some of you might have heard about like the social credit system that China is experimenting with currently, where like people who do stuff like, you know, like are buying like unsavory, so-called unsavory items like porn or cigarettes, get like a lower social credit score and have less access to certain like social goods and resources. Like, so this is like one example of how like very open internet, like very personalized internet could be bad or maybe or difficult. And there's also a lot of examples of how like a really anonymous internet could be bad or difficult. There isn't really like an easy solution to like these complex problems with conflict that humans have. What we try may work out in some ways and not in others, and it's never totally what we expect, I think.
Okay, next question is cancel culture really effective though? Do people actually get canceled?
That's a great question. I think so. I would have, if we were doing like a long discussion on this, I might have gone into it in more detail in my presentation because I think it's so interesting. So this depends on what we mean by cancel culture and who is being canceled. So if we look, if we want to like, if we think that cancel culture is just like getting rid of someone's like ability to earn their money on the internet, and we're always thinking about celebrities, then no, I would say that like most celebrities who get canceled do not really get canceled forever, or like they're still really, you know, rich and influential. So the cancellation is just like not that effective in terms of, you know, stopping them or whatever. Um, so, you know, like I think, you know, Johnny Depp is a great example of like, he got really canceled in some sectors of the internet for what the court has ruled is like potential like abuse of his wife at the time, Amber Heard, also an actress. But you know, for quite a long time after those rumors or the of the callouts of Johnny Depp, he continued to get acting jobs, including in JK Rowling's like film series Fantastic Beasts. He was recently replaced, but for quite a long time they were like keeping him in there, you know, and it remains to be seen whether he's like really canceled or not. I think he just got a big film award a few months ago. So if we mean like, does it stop powerful people from being powerful and rich? Probably not all the time. But if what we mean is like, does cancel culture like impact real people's lives? I think it does. And like a great example I like to give is like, it was really common in like some of the like queer and trans communities that I live in to do public call outs of people who are just like normal citizens, you know, like not famous or rich people. And once I saw a call out going around that was saying like this particular transgender woman should not be given access to any housing. Like nobody should like, you know, be roommates with her, allow her to like rent homes in Montreal. And this to me is like a pretty scary thing because trans people are already at like much higher risk for housing discrimination and for employment discrimination. And so if like, you know, all the people who are kind of being queer friendly or trans friendly in their housing are going to stop renting homes to someone, then they really have a big risk of losing a lot and being seriously harmed. Similarly, like people who are already suffering or marginalized, being subjected to like extended campaigns on the internet that are like telling them they're a bad person is more likely to impact their mental health because they don't have access to like good resources. So it really depends on what we're talking about and who is being impacted by the particular situation.
Sorry. I think also just maybe to add to that, it's also about, I mean, there seems to be a certain kind of weaponization by the right wing. I mean, I don't want to put it all on the right wing because certainly it happens on the left wing too. But I almost feel like, you know, I haven't looked into this, but a lot of these terms like cancel culture seem to be created by, you know, right wing media figures and that sort of thing because they feel like it's an imposition on their freedom. And I think an example of someone who also has managed to weather this kind of cancel culture storm for himself is this country singer named Morgan Wallen, who had been exposed as saying the N-word on a video, and he was supposed to appear. He was like a contestant, I think, on American Idol or something like that, I'm not sure if he won or whatever, but this happened after like this discovery, and he was supposed to appear on Saturday Night Live, and then they disinvited him, but then his album came out and it hit number one like right away, and it's been in the top 10 for a couple of months now, for several months, and so it's and he's kind of leaned he kind of apologized at first. He's been uninvited from all these other events, but at the same time he's kind of leaned into it at the same time, and kind of run with it because his success hasn't been affected, so like because a very country music is a very appeals to a very conservative audience most of the time, and so they've kind of supported him in that sense. So it depends. Like I think, like Kai Cheng says, it really depends on who you are and what kind of platform you have. I've seen so many cancel culture things on the internet. This is the next question. Mostly Twitter that seem rather dumb to do. Not all of them are bad, but I can't take them any of them seriously anymore. Is that a bad thing?
Great question. I do not know. I think it's really fair that like as a viewer in the public, one might get really burnt out of cancel culture for sure, because a lot of things are either petty or spurious, or maybe this like cancellation was not like the right response to the conflict that started it. On the other hand, there are some really big discussions going on right now about like who is given like big public platforms and like what audiences should do with that. So, an example of someone who might be said to have been canceled, yet another person is like Louis C.K., right? Who has, like openly admitted that he did some pretty like really bad stuff. Like he was sexually harassing people who were working with him in like a pretty serious way. So he, apparently apologized, then turned around and then is now doing like more tours where he's kind of leaning into it and getting embraced by a conservative crowd again, and he doesn't really seem to care that much about being canceled, right? So like maybe we should pay attention to this conversation because it tells us a lot about like what does society think is right or wrong, and then we have to make decisions as individuals, like what are we going to support or not support with our money. Or you could check out of that conversation because it's overwhelming. I think that's like an individual choice, and certainly it is pretty intense. I think maybe the most important question about cancel culture is like, how do you want to participate in it or not when you have a conflict in your life? And if there's ever a moment where like you want to call someone out or cancel someone, or like someone is being canceled or doing the canceling, like what's important to you and how do you want to participate or not participate in something like that?
I feel like also an extension of that question is how do we stop ourselves from becoming numb to this whole issue?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Do you have any ideas on that one, Alan?
I mean, I guess I think it goes back to a lot of what you said too, in terms of just being, kind to yourself and finding the compassion for yourself. I mean, I imagine if we can stay human, then we don't grow numb. But I know. Do you want to? Do you have a sort of extension of that too?
I think you're really right about that, Alan. Like, I think staying human piece is key. And when we're constantly inundated by this conflict stuff, it's really easy to get numb to it, even when the conflicts are actually like pretty different. Like there's a difference between did someone make a racist joke when they were 12, versus did somebody sexually harass an employee, right? Like those are very different, but the tone of them gets collapsed. And I think this is where I really disagree with like maybe like the right wing take on cancel culture, which is like a lot of people are like, oh, this cancel culture is always bad, right? But we're actually talking about like really lots of different kinds of conflicts that we want to stay very sensitive to, like what are the differences between them. So maybe part of being human is like learning to like not pay attention to like all of the stuff that's going on, right? Just to be like, okay, like I'm gonna like stop thinking about like whether or not my favorite celebrity has perfectly it has been a perfect human, because the truth is our celebrities are never going to be perfect humans. But like to just kind of stay tuned to like what's really important, like like has there been like a serious harm, like a real violence, you know um like true injustice, and you can decide for yourselves over time, like what do you believe is something that is like a serious conflict that you as like a public bystander should get emotionally engaged in, and what is something where you're just like, I don't need to pay attention to that. Oh, you're muted again, dear one.
God, that's what happens when you're sick. Well, I'd probably do this if I wasn't sick either. Cancel culture is all about, this is the final question. Cancel culture is all about proof and receipts as to why they're canceled, but becomes difficult when the proof, like being photoshopped or maybe a deep fake or something like that, a deep fake video, is made up by people. So my question is, how can we know what's genuine or right in cancel culture when it's hard to know what's authentic or not?
Well, see, this is where like a lot of the questions about technology like kind of get out of my area, because I'm a conflict person and not like a technology person. So it's hard for me to like really comment accurately on stuff like that. But I think like what you're asking is, I mean, I think this might be a version of like the burnout question again, right? Like there's so much information, so much of it is fake or like overblown, and then some of it is like actively like faked. Like people make up stuff or like create stuff for various purposes. How do we know what is right in cancel culture? Well, see, this whole thing has been kind of about like asking yourself if like what is the conflict behind a cancellation, and was there a different way that this conflict could have been handled than cancellation, or is cancellation like kind of like the appropriate one? And I guess like when it comes to like people faking evidence and receipts and stuff like this, like you can still choose to like kind of think about like, is this the kind of conflict that I like really want to get involved in? Right? Like it might be impossible to know whether someone has like deep faked evidence about whether or not someone has committed a serious harm. But the more serious the harm, the more likely that there's going to be some kind of like investigation or counter statement, right? And so we can kind of look at these things and weigh them in our mind and be like, okay, like how likely is it that this happened? And then, if we think it is likely, we can still think about how much do I want to get involved? And then after that, kind of make a decision. Yeah, but it's a super challenging question. The truth is, I don't know. I think I also want to say you don't have to get involved in you don't have to have opinions on every cancellation that happens in the media. Like it's okay just to be like, I don't know, like, or like I didn't read that. Like I think part of the intensity of conflict is again this like you have to choose a side kind of pressure. And the truth is you don't. Like you don't have to choose a side. You're your own person. You have your own boundaries, and you can decide whether or not you're going to take an active stance on something.
Do you think social media has sort of affected our self-control, our ability to control ourselves? Because we're on it all the time and we're just scrolling and then we see something and we feel like compelled to respond to it.
That's a great question. Again, I'm not like a expert on technology or the way it impacts people, but I will say, like, I think for sure social media is this opportunity to like unleash ourselves in a way that's like not thoughtful, or like that's trying to like work out our issues in a way that's not very appropriate. Because again, like, I think folks here today are asking some really thoughtful questions about like what's right and what's wrong and like how do you decide. But there's a lot of stuff we know is clearly wrong that people engage in cancel culture. Like again, this like harassment of people or like doxing people, right? Like there's like this phenomenon that probably all of you know about, where like if someone says something problematic on the internet, we immediately like dig like deep into their like social media history and like bring stuff up and like try to get them canceled. And there's like all these cancellations that happen for like just to get like the fame reason, right, or whatever. So I think like social media, whether or not it's changing our psychologies, which it very much might be, it certainly is giving an opportunity for some of our like not so good impulses. And that's just something to be aware of.
Okay. And also just to point out, we did have earlier today, and it was recorded, a workshop on fake media and fake news rather, and how to sort of get around or how to make sure you know what is real and what isn't real news. So that might be something to visit when it gets posted on the VTV YouTube channel later sometime early next week, so that you can maybe respond, answer that question, that last question that was asked on the Q&A. All right. So I'd like to thank Kai Cheng for giving her time today to help enlighten us on sort of a very different perspective on cancel culture in terms of maybe the sort of psychoanalytical aspects related to it, which we don't often think about. So thank you.